In the heart of a bustling American city, as the wind swept dust along cracked sidewalks and neon lights flickered above weary storefronts, a little boy walked with bare feet and a basket of forgotten flowers. His name was Noah. He was only 9 years old, a black child with deep brown eyes that carried the weight of years he never got to live. Each day, Noah wandered the streets selling leftover flowers from a vendor who barely noticed him. Daisies with sagging heads, roses whose petals had begun to curl. And yet, in his small hands, they seemed to bloom again. Noah did not know who his parents were. He had no last name, no birthday cake to remember, no bedtime stories. All he carried was a locket around his neck, old, rusty, and fragile. And inside it, a faded photo of a smiling woman holding a baby. It was the only face he had ever loved without knowing why. That evening, the city was colder than usual. Shadows stretched long, and most people walked fast, avoiding eye contact with the boy who tried to sell them a flower for just a coin. He hadn't sold a single stem all day. His stomach ached, not from sadness, he was used to that, but from hunger. Then, just as the sky turned gray and the wind grew cruel, he saw her. A woman sat on a bench near the edge of the park, her head bowed low, her shoulders shaking. She wore a dark coat, and her hands trembled as they covered her face. Noah didn't know why she cried, but he stopped. For a moment, he looked down at the last flower in his basket, a pale daisy, soft and quiet. Without a word, he stepped forward and held it out with his thin fingers. Not for money, not for food. Just because he knew what it was to feel alone. The woman slowly raised her head. Her eyes, red and swollen, met the child's, and something inside her stilled. Her breath caught as she stared at his face, that familiar curve of the cheek, the shape of his eyes. Her chest tightened as if the wind had knocked her breath away. She reached for the flower, but her gaze stayed on the boy. Frozen in disbelief, Noah simply smiled. The smile he gave everyone who didn't yell or push him away. Then he turned and walked toward the alley where he'd sleep that night, unaware of the storm he'd just stirred in a stranger's soul. The woman sat motionless, the daisy clutched in her fingers. Then, slowly, her eyes dropped to the boy's back, and to the chain around his neck, a rusty locket. A locket she had once given to her sister. She stood up suddenly. Her lips trembled as her eyes locked onto that single object swinging gently against his thin chest. But before she could call out, the boy disappeared into the crowd. And in that moment, the cold night seemed even colder, and the woman, who had thought all hope was buried with her sister, realized that the past had just walked by her, holding a daisy. That night, the city moaned under the weight of cold winds and distant sirens. Neon lights flickered above empty streets as if whispering secrets no one cared to hear. In a narrow alley between 2 abandoned buildings, Noah curled beneath a torn cardboard box, clutching his tattered blanket and the locket pressed against his chest. The flower basket lay beside him, now empty but for a few wilted petals. Hunger gnawed at him, but he had learned to ignore it, just like he ignored the noise, the stares, the pain. But something in him stirred that night. It wasn't just the hunger or the wind. It was the memory of the woman, the one who had cried, then stared at him like she had seen a ghost. The way her hands shook, the way her eyes widened when they met his. Noah had seen many faces, but hers had lingered. And for a reason he could not explain, he felt less alone. Miles away, in a warm apartment on the 6th floor of a quiet building, Amelia stood by her window in silence. The daisy was now resting in a small glass of water beside a photo frame. The picture inside showed 2 young girls, one with wild curly hair, the other with a gentler smile. Amelia reached out and traced the photo with her fingers. Her sister, Naomi, had disappeared 9 years ago after a house fire that no one survived, or so they believed. Amelia had spent years searching, praying, begging for answers that never came. The child Naomi had just given birth to was never found. Records were lost, stories were unclear, the system had failed. And time had buried the truth. But now there was a boy. A small boy with Naomi's eyes and Naomi's smile. And a locket Amelia had given her sister when they were teenagers. She had held it in her hand the night before the fire. It was impossible. It was unthinkable. And yet, she knew that boy. He had to be hers. He had to be Naomi's child. The next morning, Amelia returned to the same park bench, holding nothing but hope and an old photo in her coat pocket. She sat for hours, scanning every face, every child who passed. But he never came. Meanwhile, Noah rose early and returned to the streets, wandering different corners of the city. The alley he slept in was no longer safe. Someone had threatened him in the night, and he had run, barefoot, heart pounding. His legs ached, but his spirit never broke. As he moved through the morning fog, he held the locket tightly in his hand. Sometimes he'd open it just to see the woman in the photo. He didn't know her name, but she felt familiar, like a dream that refused to fade. He didn't know that someone else now carried the same memory in her pocket. He didn't know that his steps were slowly echoing into someone's soul. Amelia searched every corner she could. She printed copies of the photo. She whispered prayers in quiet streets. But Noah, always moving, always hiding, always surviving, remained just out of reach. And as the city roared on, the distance between them stayed small, yet impossibly wide. Until one day, Noah stood at a busy intersection, holding his flower basket under a red light. A woman passed him, not Amelia, just a stranger. But behind her, a photo slipped from her shopping bag, and as the wind carried it, it landed at Noah's feet. He bent to pick it up, and his heart stopped. It was the same face in his locket. Noah froze. The noise of the city seemed to vanish as he stared at the photograph trembling in his hand. The woman in the picture, the soft eyes, the round cheeks, the gentle curve of her smile. It was her. The same face that lived inside the locket he never let go. The same woman he had looked at 1,000 times, imagining a mother he'd never known. His breath grew shallow. His tiny fingers curled tighter around the edges of the photo. He looked up, searching for the woman who had dropped it. She was gone, vanished into the crowd like so many others before her. But something in Noah had changed. He clutched the photo and ran. He didn't know where to go or what he was looking for. His feet carried him past rows of strangers, past storefronts and honking cars, until he reached the one place that felt safe, the small, quiet garden behind the church. No one ever came there. It was hidden, forgotten, like him. There, he sat, on the edge of a cracked stone wall, and placed the photograph beside the locket. Two faces. The same, one in metal, the other in paper. Noah's mind raced with questions. Who was she? Was she real? Was she still alive? And if she was, why had she left him? Elsewhere, Amelia was walking down another street. Her eyes scanned every corner, her steps heavy with heartbreak. Days had passed since she last saw the boy. The daisy he gave her had wilted, but her memory of him had not. She carried the old photo again, now tucked into her coat pocket with quiet desperation. She retraced her steps to the same corner near the park, sat on the same bench. She watched every child that passed, but none had eyes like his. Back in the church garden, Noah rose with resolve. He needed answers, even if they scared him, even if it hurt. He tucked the photo inside his shirt, alongside the locket, and made his way to a library he had seen once, a place where people found things. Inside, people looked at him with suspicion. He was dirty, small, alone, but he didn't care. He approached the woman at the counter, holding up the picture with a trembling hand. He pointed to the face. The librarian looked confused at first. But then, she nodded. She had seen that woman before. She scribbled an address on a piece of paper. Noah took it without a word, heart racing. He left the library, holding the paper like it held his entire world. The sky had begun to darken, and clouds loomed heavy above. He walked for hours, crossing streets he'd never seen, stepping through neighborhoods that smelled of fresh bread and warm fireplaces. He didn't belong there. People stared. Some whispered. But he kept walking. At last, he stood in front of a tall building, brick walls. 6th floor. He looked up, his fingers tightening around the crumpled paper. Somewhere, behind one of those windows, was the woman in his locket. The one he had just seen crying on a bench. The one who might know who he was. But just as he took a step forward, a loud voice shouted from behind him, angry, threatening. A man from the street. A face Noah recognized. Someone he had stolen bread from weeks ago. Noah turned and ran. The address slipped from his hand as the rain began to fall. Rain poured from the sky like the heavens had been holding back too long. Thunder rolled across the rooftops and lightning split the sky into pieces. Noah ran, barefoot, soaked. The paper, the one with the address that could change his life, lay behind him, melting into the wet concrete. The man's angry voice echoed through the streets. But Noah knew these alleys better than anyone. He darted between dumpsters, slipped through narrow gaps in fences, and climbed over crates as the world around him blurred with water and fear. His chest burned. His legs trembled. But still he ran. When he finally reached a quiet corner of the city, hidden behind rows of forgotten buildings, he collapsed beneath a rusted stairwell. His shirt clung to him, heavy with rain. His tiny fingers wrapped around the locket, now colder than ever against his chest. The photo inside had begun to fade at the edges, just like the one he'd dropped. And for the first time in a long time, Noah cried. Not from hunger, not from pain, but from the weight of almost finding something and losing it again. Far away, in the warm apartment on the 6th floor, Amelia stood at her window, watching the rain slide down the glass like silent tears. The world outside looked blurred, unreachable, just like the boy who haunted her thoughts every moment since that day on the bench. She had spoken to police, to shelters, to street vendors. None had seen him. But she refused to give up. Amelia reached into her drawer and pulled out the only proof she had, a birth certificate. It was barely legible, burned around the edges, but it held a name, Noah James, the last trace of her sister's son. She stared at it as her heart whispered a truth. She could no longer deny that she would find him. The rain did not stop. Noah stayed hidden through the night, shivering. His clothes were soaked. His basket of flowers, the few he had managed to collect, had turned to mush. The city didn't offer warmth to boys like him. When morning broke, dull and gray, he rose again, weak, exhausted. But something inside him still burned. He remembered the address, not the street, not the number, but the building, the windows, the brick. He began to walk. It took him most of the day, asking people who barely looked at him, wandering in circles, staring at each doorway like it might open for him. He had no plan, no words, only a locket and a fading memory of a woman's tearful face. And then, he saw it, the building, the same bricks, the same steps. He walked to the door. His hands trembled as he reached for the handle. But it was locked. He sat down, water dripping from his sleeves, waiting, hoping. Above, Amelia returned home, tired from another day of searching. She stepped inside her apartment, dropped her umbrella, and turned toward the window. And for a moment, her heart stopped. There, sitting on the steps, soaked and shivering, was the boy. She ran. Amelia's hands flew to the doorknob, twisting it open with a force that came from somewhere deeper than panic. from hope, from desperation, from the aching place where love had been trapped for 9 long years. Her feet barely touched the floor as she ran down the stairwell, past each echoing hallway, heart pounding louder than the rain against the window panes. Outside, Noah sat motionless on the steps, his thin body hunched forward, his arms wrapped around his knees. His eyes were vacant, like clouds had rolled into his soul. He didn't see her at first. His mind had gone numb from the cold, his breath shallow beneath the weight of loss. The rain had soaked his locket again, and the chain lay tangled against his collarbone, like a thread pulled loose from a forgotten past. Then the door opened, and she was there. Amelia stepped into the rain, but her eyes saw only him. The same boy, the same eyes, the same locket that once belonged to her sister. He looked up slowly, confused, weary, and then their eyes met. It was a silence louder than any sound. Slowly, confused, weary, and then their eyes met. It was a silence loud. It was a silence louder than any sound. Stillness that wrapped around them as the world fell away. Amelia dropped to her knees in front of him. Her hands didn't reach out, not yet. She was afraid to scare him, afraid that if she blinked, he might disappear again. But Noah saw it. Not just her face, but something behind her eyes, something that felt like home. He opened the locket. Then, with shaking fingers, he pulled the now damaged photo from his pocket. He held it up. The paper sagged in the rain, but the face, it was still visible. And then, from inside her coat, Amelia pulled the same photo. It was the same image. 2 copies of a memory, separated by time and grief, now reunited on the same steps. Tears streamed down her cheeks, mixing with the rain. Her lips trembled, but she made no sound. She simply placed her photo beside his and nodded, slowly, gently, as if to say, "Yes, it's true. You are not alone." Noah didn't understand everything, but he understood enough. He leaned forward and fell into her arms. For the first time in his life, he was not pushed away, not ignored, not feared. He was held firmly, tenderly, like someone who mattered, like someone who was loved. Around them, the storm continued. But it no longer mattered. Inside that embrace, something shattered. The years of silence, of searching, of suffering. And from the brokenness, something new began to grow. She whispered something, not with words, but with warmth, with the way she held his small frame against her chest. He clung to her coat, his tears soaking into the fabric. And in the space between 2 broken hearts, a bond was born, not forged by blood alone, but by loss, by longing, and by the single act of kindness that brought them together. The flower had withered, but the roots had reached home. The storm passed, but the silence it left behind was deeper than the rain. That night, Noah didn't return to the alley. He didn't curl up beneath a broken box or huddle near a rusted pipe. Instead, he sat on a soft couch wrapped in a warm blanket, his skin still damp, but his heart finally still. Amelia watched him from across the room. She dared not move too quickly, afraid that all of this was just a fragile dream. The boy who had haunted her days and her dreams for nearly a decade now sat beneath her roof, his small frame barely denting the cushions. The locket, now resting in his hands, gleamed softly under the kitchen light. She had made him soup. He hadn't touched it, but that didn't matter, because he was here, and she would never lose him again. While Noah sat in silence, Amelia returned to her desk, the one she hadn't touched in days. Piled high with records, notes, and faded photographs, it was her shrine to the past. She opened a folder marked Noah James. Inside were every scrap of paper she had ever found. Fire reports, hospital documents, shelter names, even adoption. Papers that were never signed. It was all there. The story of a child lost in the smoke, left behind in the chaos, misplaced in a system too broken to notice. She laid the documents out carefully, and then glanced back at the boy. He was staring at her, not scared anymore, just curious. Maybe he didn't understand all of it, but he could feel something shift. He wasn't invisible now. Someone saw him. Amelia moved slowly. She brought over the stack of papers and sat beside him, leaving space between them. With gentle hands, she began to lay them on the table in front of him, not forcing him to look, but offering him the pieces of the story no one had ever told him. There was a hospital intake form with a baby's name, scrawled in smudged ink, a case file from a foster home he barely remembered, a fire report from a house that no longer stood. And at the center of it all, a birth certificate. His name, his mother's name, the date he was born, 1 week before the fire that changed everything. Noah looked at the name, Naomi James. The letters meant nothing at first. But then Amelia pulled out the last item, a framed photo of her and Naomi, their arms around each other, their eyes bright with joy that now lived only in memory. She pointed to herself, then to Naomi, then to Noah. And slowly, Noah understood. This woman, the one who cried on the park bench, the one he had given a flower to, was more than a stranger. She was a piece of him. She was the missing thread. She was his mother's sister. His aunt. And for the first time in his life, he belonged to someone. Still, Amelia knew this moment was only the beginning. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be legal battles, emotional wounds, questions with no answers. But in that moment, none of that mattered, because he was no longer lost. She reached out her hand. Slowly. Noah stared at it. And then, inch by inch, placed his own inside hers. The days that followed moved gently, like soft waves brushing the edge of a once still shore. Noah no longer woke to the sounds of angry voices or shuffling feet in cold alleys. He no longer counted coins beneath flickering streetlights. He no longer felt the ache of being forgotten. Instead, he woke to warmth, to the scent of breakfast, to clean clothes folded with care, to a voice that spoke softly even when it was silent, the voice of someone who stayed. Amelia became his anchor. She didn't rush him with questions or drown him in words. She simply gave him space, a quiet room of his own, a stuffed bear that once belonged to his mother, a small calendar where he could mark the days he no longer spent alone. Each evening, they sat together by the window. She read aloud, not stories of fairy tales, but memories. She told him about Naomi, about a sister who danced in the kitchen, who sang lullabies even when no one was listening, who carried a child with love so fierce it lit her from the inside. Noah listened with wide, wet eyes, absorbing every syllable like sunlight through his skin. The pieces of his story, once scattered across a city that never noticed him, were slowly coming together. He began to smile, not because everything was fixed, but because something had finally started to heal. Amelia filed the paperwork that would make him family again, legally, officially. The judge didn't need convincing. One look at the locket, one look at the photo, one look at the boy and the woman who held his hand, like it was made of glass and gold. He was hers now, and she was his. But there was one thing Amelia hadn't told him yet, something she had carried like a seed in her heart, waiting for the right season to let it bloom. On a quiet morning, as birds sang beyond the window pane, Amelia led Noah to a hill just outside the city. It was a quiet place, green and peaceful. A stone stood beneath a willow tree, engraved with a name, Naomi James. Noah stepped forward slowly. He knelt beside the stone, fingers tracing the letters. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He simply took the locket from around his neck, opened it, and placed it gently on the grass beside the stone. Then, from behind his back, he pulled a flower, a single daisy, the same kind he had once given to a stranger on a park bench. He laid it beside the locket, and for a long while, said nothing. Amelia knelt beside him. Together, they watched as the wind carried the petals across the hill, lifting them like whispers. It was not the end, it was the beginning of something neither of them had expected. 2. People once broken by loss, now pieced together by something so small, so pure, it could have been overlooked. A boy with a daisy, a woman with a past, and a love that had waited patiently, in silence, in sorrow, in shadows, to finally be found.